The silent march through blood. No one remembers their names anymore. No one remembers why they left. No one waits for them to return. But in the middle of January, when the snow lies heavy, like a white blanket draped over the ancient footpaths, there are still shadows of people moving forward. Not in formation. No flags, no drums, no commanders. Only those who are still alive. One ties their boots with strips torn from an undershirt. Another leans on the broken shaft of a shattered spear. One no longer speaks, just breathes, thin and ragged, lighter than the wind. They are what remains of an army that once numbered 500, now fewer than 30. No one remembers the name of the campaign. No one speaks of the reason, because here, reasons do not help you survive. The sky holds no color, only white. White of snow, white of breath freezing into beards and brows. White in their eyes, staring forward and seeing nothing. Footsteps are the only sound. Beneath them, the snow swallows their shins, clutches at swollen, cracked feet. Some walk, as if unaware they're walking. Some stop, as if wondering, is this enough? And still, they go on, not because there is hope, but because there is nothing else. An old soldier, his beard gray as ash, carries a broken sword. With each step, snow clings heavier to his coat. He doesn't brush it off. He lets it stay, as if he wants to remember each step that passed. A younger man, barely 20, rests his head on the back of the one ahead. Not sleeping, not awake, but his hand still grips a cloth bundle with a single dried potato inside, as if holding on to something more precious than consciousness. Behind them, someone pulls a body, tied with coarse rope, dragging through the snow. It is their younger brother. They cannot bury him, cannot leave him, and cannot explain why they do it. They just know he should not lie alone in the snow. At one point, they pass through a small forest, where the roots of old trees are blanketed in snow, and among the woods, tracks. A deer had passed, wounded. The blood is still fresh, red on white. A man stops to look, then walks on. No one chases, no one raises a spear, because they all know no one has the strength to kill. At dusk, they make camp. Not real tents, just patched burlap thrown into shape. They burn a dry twig, the last one left since the fire, and sit around it as if gathered for a great feast. But no one eats, because there is nothing to eat. Someone begins to speak, not to tell a story, just to name names, the names of those they've lost. Joran, my teacher, the baby born just last month. Each name is spoken softly, as if to say, I still remember, I am still alive. When night fell, someone whispered a prayer, not in words, just eyes, lifted to the sky, searching for a star to pin their hope upon. But the sky stayed silent, the wind still blew, and the snow kept falling. Slowly, very slowly, as if the world itself was sinking. And then, someone lit a fire. Another tore cloth to make a strap. Someone chuckled, quietly, remembering something old. And so, winter, no matter how deep, could not swallow them whole. That night they were still alive, not because anyone saved them, but because they held on to each other and did not let anyone vanish. In war, people often speak of blood, of blades, of thunderous battlefields. But here, there was no thunder, only soft moans, barely heard as someone took off a boot. And that smell, damp cloth, pus leaking from cracked skin, wounds that wouldn't heal, not strong, but haunting. An old soldier pulled off his leather boot, split at the seams, soaked in mud. His toes, dark purple. The skin peeled back, like the husk of a forgotten onion. Some parts, exposed flesh and bone. He did not scream. He only stared, sighed, and took a knife to trim away the dead flesh, like peeling a frozen root. Beside him, a younger boy, his ankle broken since the 10th day, still walked. Every step needed help, but he didn't complain, only murmured, "If I've got legs, I can still go home." They wrapped their feet with old belts, no medicine, no clean bandages, but they had each other. One man offered his sleeve as a dressing. Another laid a bag under a friend's neck so it wouldn't touch the freezing ground. They walked all day, 10 kilometers, as if each step whispered, "I'm still here." Some fell behind, but no one was left. They turned back, lifted them, or simply slowed down to match. At the base of the hill, they paused to rest. One man dropped down, took off his boots, and pulled out the hay stuffed inside. Instead of groaning, he laughed. "My feet look like peeled potatoes now." They all smiled, quietly. Not because it was funny, but because a smile was the only thing that wasn't cold. One man had lost a toenail 2 days ago. The blood and pus soaked through the cloth. The one beside him tore his own shirt, still dry, and wrapped the foot gently. No words, no thanks needed. Because here, life is something shared, not something owned. Someone crawled forward with 2 hands and 1 leg, dragging himself bit by bit. But his eyes were still bright. And every time someone said, "Rest now," he would shake his head. "It's not the end yet. If I can move, I should move." And so, they all stood up again. What did they carry on their backs? No gold, no letters, no medals. Only blankets, a few dry twigs, a dented pot, and memories. The only thing lighter than breath, yet strong enough to carry through the mountains of snow. When night came, they sat with knees tucked tight around a tiny pile of embers. Some slept half reclined, afraid if they lay flat, they might never rise again. One rested his hand over his friend's leg, just to keep it warm. That night, a young soldier said softly, "If I don't wake up tomorrow, don't carry me. Let me sleep here." His friend said nothing. He simply pulled the wool cap gently over the boy's brow and whispered, "Then sleep well. I'll wake first and start the fire." And so they did not die of cold, nor of broken bones. They lived. Because someone pulled a cap over their head when they couldn't do it themselves. That evening, the wind changed. The snow slowed, but didn't melt. It turned into tiny pellets, soft hail, sharp as needles. The soldiers found a dip in the land, a hollow shielded from the wind. Some dry twigs had fallen during the night, enough to start a fire. One man took off the strap of his old watch, snapped it for kindling. Another pulled a dented pot, blackened with soot, from his cloth sack. They were going to cook the only meal they'd have that day. No rice, no meat, no salt. Only a few dried potato skins, a handful of barley mixed with grit, and melted snow. An old soldier plunged his hand into the snow, scooped it into the pot, then placed the lid on top and balanced the pot on 3 stones like a stove. When the fire lit, the smell of scorched wood filled the air. No one complained. They sat quietly, watching the smoke rise like a silent prayer. When the water boiled, they took turns adding the ingredients, slowly, as if afraid to rush something sacred. One whispered, "If I were a priest, I'd call this holy soup." Someone nearby chuckled, "I just hope it's not as bitter as yesterday." When the porridge was ready, No one used a spoon. They scooped it with canteen lids, with dried gourd shells, or simply with the palms of their hands. They divided it equally, precise as if measured by the heart. Each received a portion, no more, no less. No one ate first. Everyone waited. Waited for the wounded man to wake and take the first spoonful. Then they all ate. Not because it tasted good, but because it meant one thing. Today, we are still here. Some closed their eyes as they swallowed. Some cried, not from the taste, but from the warmth. Someone hummed an old tune. He who shares his soup with another will never walk through winter alone. A young soldier tried to eat quickly, but the older one beside him placed a hand on his shoulder. Eat slowly. The porridge is little, but the day is long. The boy nodded, then lifted the bowl as if receiving a letter from home. As the porridge cooled, they didn't mind. They poured the last warm drops into their hands, rubbed it onto their cheeks, as if trying to find a trace of human warmth. That night they weren't hungry, not because they were full, but because they were given a share. And when the belly holds something, the heart feels just a little less empty. One soldier said, "If it's cold again tomorrow, let's make more." Another smiled. "The soup may grow cold, but don't let your heart do the same." And so they slept. In the snow, in the cold. But a deep sleep, because today there was soup. And someone sat nearby, tending the fire. That night snow fell like ash. The wind no longer howled, it sighed. The soldiers' makeshift camp had only a few flickering embers left. One of them could not sleep, not from cold, but from longing. He stood up, stepped away from the others. His feet pressed into a slope, dusted with old snow, crushed grass, and ashes from the battle last month. Each step, a slip waiting to happen. But he didn't stop. And then, beneath the pale sky, he sang, not loud, not shouted, just a breath of song, like a wisp of smoke. Mama, I walk through woods alone. My feet are cold, the wind has grown, but my heart stays warm and true, for I remember your hands and how they wrapped me too. The others looked up. No one spoke. They just listened, as if the voice didn't come from him, but from the heart of the village they had all once left behind. An old man closed his eyes. He remembered his wife, who used to sing that lullaby when their son turned 6. The young man felt tears rise, not knowing why, only that he suddenly felt small again. The words blurred near the end. His lips were numb. His voice trembled, wet with tears. But no one minded, because there, every note was a prayer. When the song ended, he returned. No one clapped, no one praised. But as he sat down, someone handed him the last piece of dry bread and softly said, "Save your voice. Sing again tomorrow night." And in silence, they slept again. But that night, they dreamed, not of battle, but of rooftops, of straw, of a mother's hum, of the old fireplace at the back of the kitchen. A young soldier whispered just before sleep took him, "I don't need to know where we're going anymore, as long as someone sings each night." And so, through wind, through aching bones, through dying embers, one sound remained. A song, thin but unbroken, holding their souls together even as their bodies crumbled. That morning, no snow fell, but the old snow had not melted. It hardened into a thin, brittle crust. With each footstep, crack, crack, like the sound of memories breaking. A young soldier named Emil began to slow down, not because his feet hurt, but because he had lost something. They had been walking for over an hour, but Emil suddenly stopped. The man beside him turned back and asked, "What is it?" Emil didn't answer right away. He just stared at the snow and whispered, "My ring." The other frowned. "What ring? You're wearing gloves." Emil shook his head gently. "My wedding ring. I tied it in a handkerchief, kept it in my chest pocket. I check it every night. This morning, it was gone." Emil turned back. Step by step, he retraced the snowy path they had just walked. The white snow made everything vanish. The ring was small, dull bronze, not easy to spot. But still, he knelt and scraped the snow with bare hands. Every step, every meter, someone said softly, "Let it go. We'll make you another when we get home." Emil smiled, not with pain, not with sadness, just quietly. This ring, I never got the chance to put it on her finger, and they understood. He had carried it throughout the campaign, close to his heart, as a promise not yet spoken, not in words, not on paper, but in survival. At last, after nearly an hour, he found it. It lay in a hollow spot where someone had once rested, half buried by snow, half covered by ash. He lifted it, his hands trembling, and kissed it, as a soldier kisses his sword when pledging loyalty. No one clapped. No one said, "Congratulations." But when he returned to the group, someone held out a piece of dry cloth. "Wrap it again, this time tighter." And another added, "Next time you wear it, your hands won't be shaking." That whole day, Emil said nothing more. But his steps felt lighter. His eyes looked brighter. And when night fell, he was the one tending the fire, drying gloves, stoking embers, and carving her name onto his knife handle. Marian. In a world where people were so easily left behind, Emil had turned back just for a ring. And by doing so, he kept one part of his soul from dissolving in the snow. As the group entered the third week of the journey, snow was no longer the thing they feared most. It was silence. The silence when someone no longer woke up. At first, it was just one. In the morning, his hands pale, without color, no breath on his beard, eyes open, staring at the sky as if still dreaming. They didn't scream, didn't cry out his name. They simply pulled his hood over his face, laid him against the slope, covered him with snow, and placed a small branch above him like a cross. No prayers were said, only one whispered, "We will tell this story, if anyone is left to listen." But then, a second, then a third. One day, two didn't wake up. No beasts, no wounds, just winter, taking back whatever it touched. They could not bury them. The ground was too hard, their hands too weak. But they etched names into burned sticks, tied them to short poles, and drove them into the snow. 1 row, 2 rows, 7 sticks, each one a soul who had left. They didn't mark the graves to protect the dead, but to tell Winter this person was loved. One morning, they paused longer than usual, because someone no longer wanted to leave anyone behind. We carry them with us, even if it's just a piece of cloth, or the old sword they left behind, even if it's only their name, written on our coat. And from that day on, they never let anyone go alone. A young soldier carved the names of the lost into his walking stick. When the stick broke, he picked up the biggest piece and wore it around his neck, not out of superstition, but because grief needs a shape to rest in. That night, when the fire was lit, like every other night, someone began to read aloud. Lorik, my friend, who carried me through the coldest pass. Jara, the best storyteller I ever knew. Maros, who played the flute with a broken bamboo tube. And so, their names lived again with every mention. No one ever truly disappears as long as someone still remembers. There was a very young soldier, barely 17, who asked the oldest man in the group, "Do you think they know we're still walking?" The old man rested a hand on his head and replied slowly, "If you remember them, then they're walking with us." That night no one spoke much, but they all lay closer together. And when snowflakes touched their cheeks, no one brushed them away. As if those flakes were the hands of those long gone, still reaching back. The map had torn the week before. Each day, the sky changed. The wind spun its direction, and the original path, once clear, was now only snow, collapsed trails, and wooden crosses made from broken sticks. They had walked nearly a month. Each turn brought nothing but howling wind and the bodies of frozen animals. Some began to avoid looking each other in the eye, because now those eyes no longer asked, "How far?" but instead, "How much longer?" Then one day, they reached a fork in the path. To the right, the old road. The snow was thinner, and hoof prints still marked the way. But far ahead, dark figures stood still. No one stepped closer, because everyone understood. Those people never made it. To the left, a forest, dark, pathless. Only the rustling of trees, briars, and the unknown. No one gave the order, but they all stopped. The oldest among them, the one who had lost 3 fingers to frost, spoke. "The right road leads to death. The left leads nowhere. But if we still want to live, then let's choose the place where no one has died yet," a young soldier murmured. "Then, what do we call it? The right is the way home. But this," the old man answered gently, "call it the way we might live if we're still breathing tomorrow." And so, they turned left. No rallying cries, no shouts of courage, just quiet steps into fresh snow. The forest was not kind. Thorns tore their coats, rocks slipped, mud froze. Some nights they tied themselves together with cloth, so if one collapsed, the others could pull him up. And on some nights, there was only one breathing sound among 10. But then, something strange happened. In the forest, the wind did not howl like it did out on the plains. And so, the silence was no longer frightening. It became a quiet space to hear one another. The sound of dry swallows, the rustle of cloth, footsteps, and the steady beat of hearts still alive. One found mushrooms growing on an oak root. Another noticed water dripping from the roots of a tree. Someone found deer tracks, still warm, and for the first time in many weeks, they whispered to each other, there might be something ahead. That night they didn't light a fire, afraid someone might see the smoke. But they lay closer than ever before. One man dreamed of fire crackling in the woods, and the smell of fresh bread. When he woke, he smiled and said, "I haven't eaten yet, but that dream was warm enough." One young soldier wrote on a piece of bark, "First day in the forest. Don't know where we're going, but for the first time, I don't feel left behind. We are still the living." Then he hung the bark on a branch, a quiet marker. And so, while the snow still blanketed the world outside, those who remained in it chose a path no one else knew. Not to escape, not for glory, but simply to keep one another alive for one more day. On the 3rd night in the woods, they found a small clearing where the trees thinned and snow fell lightly. An old soldier turned and said, "Let's light a fire, our last fire, for this morning, this night, and maybe for the tomorrow that may not come." No one replied, but everyone began gathering. Bark, dry branches, half-burned cloth from old coats, and the military journal left behind by their commander on the first day. The soldier who had kept the journal held it for a long while. Then he nodded. It's worth it. What needed to be written is already in our hearts. And he let it fall into the flame. When the fire caught, it was smaller than any fire they'd made before, but warmer than all the others. Not because of the fuel, but because, for the first time, everyone knew this might be the last. They sat around the fire, like so many times before, but no one adjusted their coat. No one dried their boots. They just looked at one another. A young soldier brought out a small wooden box. Inside, the last piece of dried bread. He broke it in half. One piece for the man beside him. The other man refused. You need it more. But he replied, it's not to fill us, it's to say goodbye properly. An old soldier looked out into the dark forest, as dark as a starless sky. If I don't wake tomorrow, whoever's still alive, light another fire. Don't let me leave in the cold. Someone quietly told a story about the first time he got lost in the snow with his father. His father had wrapped his arms around him all night to keep him warm. I don't remember his face anymore, but I remember the warmth. He looked around. Tonight, I feel it again. Someone held another's hand, not to pray, not to say goodbye, just to hold. Like an anchor line between two boats in a white sea. The fire dimmed. The wind grew colder. One man cupped his hands around the flame, not to keep warm, but to stretch out the light, like stretching a beautiful dream for just a few minutes more. And then, one by one, they fell asleep. Not curled up, not shivering, but sitting upright, leaning gently on each other's shoulders, like silent statues. The fire died just before dawn, but no one felt cold, because the warmest thing had already been kept in their hearts. And if anyone lived to see morning, they would remember that night, not as a farewell, but as a quiet celebration, by people who knew they had lived beautifully to the end. The next morning, snow fell more gently, but their legs no longer wanted to move. No one had died during the night, but no one was unbroken. An old soldier slumped against a tree, breathing slow and shallow. I feel like I'm dissolving, not pain, just fading. The man beside him didn't answer. He only wiped the cold sweat from his friend's forehead, then whispered, "Tell me something about who you were before you were a soldier." And so, he began, not with a storyteller's voice, but with halting breath, about his first love, a wild girl who climbed trees and hid cookies in her books, about the time he broke his father's chair, sneaking up to read adventure stories, about the laughter when his mother spilled an entire pot of porridge and they sat down to eat it off the floor. Then another told his story. He once had a dog named Rue. Rue liked to bury bones behind the house, and every winter it would forget where. Maybe I'm like him, the man smiled. Buried my dreams somewhere, then forgot. But now, I think they're coming back. Another spoke of his little sister, who gave him a scratchy wool scarf before he went to war. She said, "It's terrible, but it's the first one I ever made." He had kept that scarf in his chest the whole journey. It was no longer warm, but he had never let it fall. The 17-year-old whispered, "I used to be a potter. My bowls were uneven, my vases cracked. One time my teacher told me, better to be cracked and honest than perfect and hollow." Then he looked up at the snowy sky. "I think I'm cracked now, but I'm not hollow." No one laughed out loud, only quiet smiles, soft as morning mist. Not for amusement, but to keep one another awake. All day they told stories, not about battles, not about victories or losses, but about the small things that once made them who they were. As dusk came, one man said quietly, "Telling stories is like making fire. You don't need wood, just heart and someone beside you." That night, no one told stories aloud, but everyone remembered. Each man lying down, repeating his own story silently, like a lullaby for his heart. And someone whispered, just before sleep, "If I don't wake tomorrow, don't be sad, because tonight I got to hear a whole life wrapped in white snow." No one knew which day would be their last step through the snow, because snow doesn't signal anything. It just falls, even cold, like a song with no end. And then, one morning they saw it, a droplet of water falling from a tree branch, not melting snow, but real water, clear. It rolled gently and landed on a single dry leaf that hadn't yet fallen. One man whispered, "I hear something small, not the wind, but like the earth, breathing." And then, the next day, they heard a bird, just one single chirp. But it made the old soldier sit upright like a child. "It's singing, a real bird." And everyone laughed, for the first time, not out of politeness, but because something had suddenly lifted from their hearts. They kept walking, still not knowing where they were going. But no one shivered anymore. Not because it was warmer, but because inside the snow had stopped falling. A few days later, they met someone. An old woodsman with a silver beard and a coarse linen coat, gathering fallen branches. When he saw them, he paused for a long time, then simply said, "I thought none of you had survived." They didn't answer. They just nodded and sat down beside the fire he built. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't their fire. One of them collapsed and cried, not from hunger, not from exhaustion, but because they had reached a place where someone still lived and could listen. There weren't many left. Some had stayed behind, buried in the deep forest. Some, no one knew. But those who remained were led to a small village by the river. There were no medals. No one called them heroes. But an old woman knitted them wool socks. A little boy drew water from the well and handed it to each one. And a man wrote down their story in words soft as spring wind. Spring came, gently. Snow melted into small streams. The wind carried the smell of earth and tender grass. Forest trees budded, and birds began calling each other home. No one spoke of that journey as a battle anymore, but as a lesson no one had taught. That life was not found at the destination, but in those who walked beside you. And if you passed through those northern woods in the spring, you might notice small branches carved with names, using broken knives. Names like Lorik, Emil, Maros, Yare. None were famous. None became generals. But each one once held another's hand and helped them live. And as the woodsman once said, they didn't defeat the winter, but they didn't let the winter forget that they had lived.